Inheritance has always been a loaded subject, emotionally volatile, legally labyrinthine, and uniquely capable of fracturing even the closest families. But when the family in question sits at the very apex of one of the world's oldest monarchies, the stakes take on a dimension that ordinary estate disputes could never approach. The last will and testament of a British monarch is, by long-standing tradition, sealed from public view for 90 years. A deliberate veil of secrecy designed to protect the institution from the scrutiny that full transparency would invite. Now, however, Buckingham Palace is alive with speculation. Leaks have begun to surface suggesting that Prince William has revealed key details from the late Queen's final wishes. And those details, unexpected, quietly explosive, point to decisions that may overturn traditions as old as the crown itself. Who was left out? What was passed on? And to whom? And what does it mean for the relationships binding together the House of Windsor going forward? Stay with us. The answers are more complicated than anyone has been willing to say out loud. Queen Elizabeth II's will has been the subject of fascination and speculation since the moment of her death on September 8, 2022. She was, by any measure, one of the most consequential figures of the 20th and 21st centuries, a monarch who reigned for 70 years, who witnessed the transformation of an empire into a commonwealth, who outlasted 15 British prime ministers and remained a fixed point of national identity through decades of dizzying change. When she died, she left behind not only a legacy, but a fortune. One divided along carefully drawn lines that only a handful of people have ever been permitted to see. In the United Kingdom, wills are ordinarily public documents. Anyone can, in principle, access the last wishes of a deceased person. But the wills of the royal family are a different matter entirely. A precedent established in the 20th century holds that the wills of monarchs and their spouses remain sealed for 90 years. A time frame designed to ensure that private family matters do not become public spectacle during the lifetimes of those most directly affected. The practical consequence of this tradition is stark. The will of Prince Philip, who died in April 2021, will remain inaccessible to the public until the year 2111. Whatever Queen Elizabeth wished to communicate through her final legal document, the world will not officially know for generations. What no one realized at the time was how much that enforced silence would itself become the story. To understand the magnitude of what Queen Elizabeth left behind, it is necessary to understand what she accumulated over 7 decades on the throne. Her estate divides into 2 distinct categories: personal assets and the crown estate. These are not the same thing, and the distinction matters enormously. The crown estate, encompassing institutional landmarks like Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle, vast stretches of central London real estate, the seabed around much of England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and offshore wind farm rights, is valued at approximately £15 billion. By the 2022 report, its total assets had reached £16.5 billion, including £8 billion in London property alone. But the Crown Estate is not the Queen's personal property. It is held in trust for the nation, managed independently, and its profits flow to the British Treasury, with a portion returned to the monarch through the mechanism known as the sovereign grant. The personal estate is something else entirely, estimated by the Sunday Times at more than $420 million and valued closer to $500 million when all assets are counted. This is the wealth that belongs to the Queen as an individual rather than as an institution. It includes Balmoral Castle, where she spent her final days, in the Scottish Highlands. It includes Sandringham House in Norfolk, the beloved family gathering place for Christmas. It includes a jewelry collection valued at $110 million, comprising 300 pieces that belong specifically to her rather than to the crown. It includes art, racehorses, and the accumulated financial assets of a lifetime of private wealth building. This is the part most people never hear about. The scale of the Queen's private fortune, carefully constructed over decades, separate from the constitutional architecture of the monarchy itself. When a British monarch dies, succession does not merely transfer a title. It transfers an entire financial ecosystem. King Charles III inherited the Duchy of Lancaster, a private estate covering more than 18,000 hectares across Lancashire, Yorkshire, and other regions of England. Valued at £654 million, The duchy generates an annual income of approximately £20 million from its various properties and landholdings. Among its assets is Knaresborough Castle in Yorkshire, a historic site that adds both prestige and revenue to the holding. Crucially, the income generated by the Duchy of Lancaster is not subject to corporate tax, though the monarch voluntarily pays income tax on its proceeds, a commitment to financial transparency that the Queen established in 1993 and that Charles has continued. Beyond the duchy, Charles inherited the Queen's personal wealth directly: money, art, racehorses, all of it passing from one sovereign to the next free of the 40% inheritance tax that ordinary British families must pay. This arrangement was formalized in the 1993 Memorandum of Understanding on Royal Taxation, which established that assets held in the capacity of a sovereign, rather than as a private individual, are not subject to standard inheritance duties. The Crown had, in other words, negotiated with the government the terms under which its own wealth would pass between generations. Critics have pointed to this arrangement as one of the starkest examples of the monarchy operating according to rules that simply do not apply to anyone else. But what happened next would change everything about how the next generation understood its own inheritance. Prince William, upon the death of his grandmother, inherited the Duchy of Cornwall, a private estate valued at more than £1 billion by 2022, covering over 52,000 hectares across 20 counties in England and Wales. The duchy had previously been held by his father during Charles's decades as Prince of Wales. Created in 1337 specifically to provide financial support for the heir to the throne, it generates revenue through rural and urban landholdings, rental properties, and other assets scattered across Cornwall, Wales, and beyond. In fiscal year 2022-2023, the Duchy of Cornwall produced a surplus of £24 million, a figure that gives William a degree of financial independence that most people can barely comprehend. In 2018, under Charles's stewardship, the duchy had delivered $28 million to the then Prince of Wales and Camilla. The expectation is that William and Catherine will enjoy comparable returns, perhaps more as the estate continues to grow. Like the Duchy of Lancaster, the Cornwall estate's profits are not subject to corporate tax, though William follows the same tradition of voluntarily paying income tax on the income it generates. On the surface, it looked like a seamless transfer of wealth and responsibility. Underneath, something far more personal and contested was unfolding. Catherine, now Princess of Wales, is also expected to inherit a significant portion of the Queen's personal jewelry collection, the $110 million trove of 300 individually owned pieces. In the final months of her life, the Queen reportedly revised her will with specific attention to which of her most treasured possessions would pass to whom, with a notable focus on Catherine as a recipient of key items. This decision, according to sources close to the family, generated friction with Queen Consort Camilla, who was reportedly displeased by what she perceived as a pointed preference extended toward Kate. Notably absent from the jewelry that will pass to Catherine is the tiara worn by Princess Diana on her wedding day to Prince Charles. That particular piece will go instead to Princess Charlotte, William and Catherine's daughter, who will inherit it as she grows into the role the Crown will eventually ask of her. Not every member of the royal family found themselves on the right side of the Queen's final wishes. Some were conspicuously excluded. Prince Harry, who resigned from his official royal duties in January 2020, reportedly received little, if anything, of consequence from the Queen's personal estate. This was not unexpected, given the circumstances of his departure and the financial framework the family had established around his exit. Representatives of the royal family had already made clear that Harry would not be a beneficiary of the millions left to the royal family through the trust established by the Queen Mother. Behind closed doors, the story looked very different from the image of familial unity the palace occasionally attempted to project. Harry and William had both previously inherited from their mother, Princess Diana, when each turned 25, receiving an estimated $10 million each from her estate. By the standards of the monarchy's broader wealth, this was a modest sum. But it represented Diana's direct provision for her sons, separate from the institutional inheritance that the Crown manages. When the Queen died, the dynamic around Harry's inheritance had already been shaped by years of rupture. Both brothers attended the eulogy for the Queen in Aberdeen, Scotland, But their wives, Meghan Markle and Catherine, were notably absent from the service, an absence that underscored the fractured state of the family's internal relationships. Harry's decision to step back from royal duties had, in the estimation of the institution, altered the trajectory of his financial future entirely. Any requests Harry made to the Queen for financial support during the transition period were reportedly redirected to his father, who was placed in charge of managing whatever provisions existed for his younger son. The expectation within royal circles was that Charles would eventually make allocations for his grandchildren, not for Harry himself, who had chosen a path outside the palace system and was actively constructing a life built on independent financial success. The case of Prince Andrew presents a different kind of exclusion, one rooted not in voluntary departure, but in catastrophic reputational collapse. Andrew had for many years been considered the Queen's favorite child among her younger sons, and there was a widespread assumption within royal circles that he would receive a meaningful share of her personal fortune. Those assumptions collided with reality when photographs emerged showing Andrew alongside convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell at Balmoral Estate in Scotland. The images compounded existing damage from Andrew's disastrous 2019 BBC interview about his relationship with Epstein, in which his explanations satisfied virtually no one. The truth, when it finally came out, was far darker than anyone inside the palace had been prepared to manage. Andrew's association with Epstein and the civil lawsuit filed against him by Virginia Giuffre, which he ultimately settled in February 2022 without admitting liability, effectively ended his public life as a working royal. He was stripped of his military affiliations and royal patronages. He withdrew from public duties. Whatever inheritance the Queen may have once contemplated directing his way, the scandal had reshaped the calculation in ways that could not be undone. His financial position had become, by the final years of the Queen's life, a subject of considerable uncertainty. And the silence around the specifics of her will only deepened that uncertainty for everyone watching from outside. And then, without warning, everything collapsed further, as the sealing of the will ensured that the truth might not emerge for 90 years. The financial architecture supporting the British monarchy is more layered and more complex than most of the public has ever had reason to investigate. The sovereign grant, first established by King George III in 1760 and reorganized in 2012 to replace the civil list, is the primary mechanism through which the state funds the official activities of the royal family. It is calculated as a percentage of the Crown Estate's profits from 2 years prior. Initially set at 15%, the grant was temporarily elevated to 25% beginning in 2017 to finance a 10-year, £369 million renovation of Buckingham Palace. For the 2022-2023 fiscal year, the sovereign grant held at £86.3 million, the same as the previous year. But total royal expenditure for that year reached £107.5 million, driven by the costs associated with Charles's accession to the throne and the effects of inflation. The £20.7 million shortfall was drawn from reserves. That gap revealed something the public conversation about royal wealth often obscures. The monarchy is not simply a recipient of unlimited state generosity. It operates within financial constraints, draws on reserves when those constraints are exceeded, and must justify its spending against increasingly exacting public expectations. What no one realized at the time was how fundamentally the offshore wind revolution was about to alter the entire equation. The Crown Estate includes rights over much of the seabed around England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And those seabed rights include the rights to offshore wind energy generation. As wind farm development has surged in recent years, the revenues flowing through the Crown Estate have risen dramatically, enlarging the pool from which the sovereign grant is calculated. For the 2024-2025 fiscal year, the funding percentage has been reduced to 12%, a deliberate adjustment responding to the rapid growth in offshore wind profits. Even so, projections suggest the grant could reach £126 million by 2026-2027, driven by those same wind revenues. King Charles himself has requested that a portion of these additional profits be directed toward broader public benefit, a gesture that aligns with the stated ambition to move the monarchy closer to the values of transparency and public service that contemporary Britain expects from its institutions. The Crown Estate's total portfolio is valued at approximately £15 billion, comprising Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, the Royal Lodge, and major sections of central London's West End. The 2022 annual report placed total assets at £16.5 billion, with £8 billion in London property and an expanding offshore wind portfolio generating substantial new revenues. The estate is managed independently of the royal family, and its profits flow primarily to the Treasury. The Crown holds no personal title to these assets. The sovereign grant, which returns a portion of those profits to the monarchy, is the formal bridge between the national wealth the Crown manages as custodian and the public funding that sustains its operations. This is the part most people never hear about when they debate whether the monarchy is worth its cost. The Duchy of Lancaster, valued at £654 million, continues to support the monarch's personal finances with an annual income of approximately £20 million. The Duchy of Cornwall, now under Prince William's stewardship, covers more than 52,000 hectares and generated a £24 million surplus in its most recent reporting year. Neither duchy is subject to corporate tax. Both are voluntarily income taxed by their holders. The Queen's personal estate, meanwhile, includes Sandringham and Balmoral, which remain private properties held outside the constitutional framework of the Crown. Their disposition following the Queen's death remains, officially, a matter of sealed record. The true cost of the monarchy extends well beyond what the sovereign grant captures. Security expenditures are borne by the Metropolitan Police, with exact figures never publicly disclosed. Major events carry their own price tags. The Queen's state funeral cost the government approximately £162 million. Unofficial estimates for King Charles's coronation range from £50 to £100 million. The Republican campaign group Republic estimates the total annual cost of the monarchy, when security, personnel, and additional official duties are fully accounted for, at approximately £345 million per year. Against this, the monarchy's defenders cite economic returns that dwarf those costs. Brand Finance, a leading consultancy, has argued that the royal family's contribution to the British economy through tourism, commercial activity, and international promotion of British identity vastly exceeds the expense of maintaining the institution. The debate between these positions has continued for decades and shows no sign of resolution. What we are left with in the absence of the Queen's actual will is a mosaic assembled from leaks, traditions, precedents, and calculated speculation. Prince William has inherited a billion-pound duchy and a role at the center of one of the world's most scrutinized institutions. Catherine has received portions of a priceless jewelry collection and a tiara designated for her daughter. King Charles has assumed the Duchy of Lancaster, the sovereign grant, and the weight of a crown he waited longer than any heir in history to receive. Prince Harry has received very little of the Queen's formal estate, having departed the system that distributes it. Prince Andrew has seen whatever expectations he once held eroded by a scandal he has never fully escaped. In the exact terms of all of this, the numbers, the names, the specific bequests will remain sealed for 90 years. Since 1993, the family has voluntarily paid income tax and capital gains tax on personal revenues, a significant step toward financial accountability that reshaped the public relationship with royal wealth. The ongoing adjustments to the sovereign grant and King Charles's expressed desire to direct surplus profits toward public benefit reflect an institution that understands it must evolve or face the consequences of appearing not to. The financial structure of the British monarchy is a negotiation in perpetual motion between public funding and private wealth, between institutional tradition and modern accountability, between a family that has always operated by its own rules and a public that is increasingly inclined to ask whether those rules still make sense. With so much speculation and so little confirmed fact, the truth remains locked away for 90 years. Until then, all we can do is examine the evidence at hand, piece together what the leaks and precedents suggest, and wonder how the division of this extraordinary inheritance will ultimately shape the Windsor family for generations to come. What do you think? Share your perspective in the comments below. If this story gave you something to think about, like, share, and subscribe for more updates on the people and institutions shaping the world around us.